much as the interview. Just go with the flow.
Okay, sounds good.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hey everybody, thanks for being here with us tonight. I'm Sierra, as you all know, with the E-Community, and today we have Elizabeth on with us. Thank you, Elizabeth, for being here. So Elizabeth is the owner of the Fat Moon Mushroom Farm. So she's going to be telling us a little bit about what she's been doing there and all the cool stuff that comes along with that. So go ahead and give yourself an introduction, Elizabeth, and I'll just let you take it away.
Great, thanks, Sierra, and thanks to everyone who helped host tonight, and Arif and Mark and everyone who helped put this together. I'm excited to chat with you. I do have some slides prepared. Did you have questions first, Sierra, or did you want me to jump into?
Yeah, we'll do a little bit of questions first. I just want you to kind of introduce yourself, what you're doing, what Fat Moon Mushroom Farm is, and kind of start there.
Okay, great. So I live outside of Boston in the suburb of Westford, and I grow organic mushrooms. They're all culinary mushrooms, as you can see on the screen here. We work with local chefs, and I also sell through local farm stands. So I grow about 8 kinds of mushrooms. Not a huge variety, but I'm working on building up a market in this area.
Do you have a team that helps you with all of this?
I do. So I have, this week is very exciting. Actually, just today, I hired my first full-time employee started today. So I've had several part-time employees, and I'm excited to be able to provide full-time employment to a woman who shares my enthusiasm for mushrooms and entrepreneurship. And then I have several part-time employees that help me. And then we've also started offering educational programs on how to grow your own mushrooms. So I have a gal who helps organize those programs as well, and a college student who's interning and helping with some of my marketing.
That's great. So how did you get into mushrooms? What was your background before? What led you down the path of this adventure?
Sure. So right before I was growing mushrooms, I was running a CSA, a vegetable CSA. And I did that for a few years, but I was leasing land to do that. And I realized it was just going to be cost prohibitive to continue to lease land to grow vegetables. And so I took some time and I was trying to figure out what was next. And I was thinking of one of my college classes. I have my MBA from Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland. And I had a professor of information systems who talked about creativity. And he gave us the challenge that to be more creative, you can take an existing situation, put a limitation on it, and then try to achieve the same results. And so I found myself thinking, how can I be part of our local food system and grow food if I don't have sunlight to work with? Because it seems impossible to grow food without sunlight. And we live on about 1.5 acres of woods. So I started experimenting with mushrooms and cultivating mushrooms, grew them in my basement, grew them outside. I made little tents in the woods around our house. And I was growing a lot of mushrooms around here, and eventually outgrew the space here at our house because I wanted to be able to grow mushrooms year round. And I was getting more orders than I could fill growing mushrooms in my basement. So I found space in an old mill building and moved about 3.5 years ago, moved the business into a mill building, which has allowed me to expand quite a bit.
Very cool. So I don't want to ask too many questions and give away your presentation. What are you going to be focusing on today?
Sure. So 2 things. First, I just wanted to share with folks information about my business. So people are really curious about, just the idea of running a mushroom business is such a fascinating, unusual thing. So I prepared information on that. And then the second part is for anybody who is really curious about growing their own mushrooms. I put together some slides showing our grow your own kits. So in addition to growing mushrooms that we sell to local restaurants and farm stands, we also sell kits that are available online. They can be shipped anywhere in the lower 48 states in the US. And it's a really easy way for folks to have their first experience of growing mushrooms. And the challenge is once you have your first experience, then you'll be hooked in trying to figure out more ways to grow mushrooms and to be part of our mushroom community. I will point out right now on the screen, we had some pictures from my Instagram page. There are tremendous folks on Instagram sharing mushroom information. So I have a nice feed and follow quite a few other mushroom growers and foragers. So much great information. It's really fun to learn from other folks who are sharing so generously of their experiences foraging for mushrooms as well.
So with being the owner, you're pretty much running the show. What does like an average day in the life of you look like? Are you doing a lot of the growing? Are you running the business?
Sure. So the reason I hired a full-time employee was to help run the business and actually do the growing part of it for me, so that I wasn't picking mushrooms every day. So she's going to start doing the daily harvesting, packing orders, and working with the chefs, doing all that so I can focus more on expanding the business. So we're looking to expand our online presence to sell the grow kits. So we're looking at ways to invest more in online marketing, and then looking also to expand physically and to scale up the business to grow even more mushrooms. To grow mushrooms, there are a few steps to the process. So part of it is pasteurizing and inoculating your grow medium, which for us is sawdust. And then the second part of that is fruiting, and which requires a room with high humidity and a lot of fresh air. So there are opportunities for me to expand in that as well, starting more blocks, even working with other growers, because you can specialize in the starting blocks or in fruiting. So there are opportunities to expand beyond fruiting and selling to chefs. So I'm working on that part of the business right now.
Okay. I'm interested in hearing more about the business side a little bit before we jump in to the science side and all the mushroom stuff. So how long has Fat Moon Mushrooms been around, like the actual company?
Sure. So I started Fat Moon about 10 years ago, but like I said, it started with vegetables, and we've been growing mushrooms now for 6 years.
Okay. And is this something that is like a sustainable career for you, do you think, for long term? Or are you turning a profit from doing this? Is this your sole income right now?
I am turning a profit from this. This is my sole job.
Right.
I felt
Love to hear
confident
that.
hiring an employee, a full-time employee, and being able to offer her benefits. So my plan right now is to continue expanding the business and focusing on the profitability of the business. I think food businesses, that you should be able to sell a food business or farm business as you would, any other type of business. So I do focus, keep a close eye on my bottom line as I'm enjoying the business at this point and making money at it. Eventually, I may choose to sell the business. So I try to manage it with that perspective that someday when I'm done growing mushrooms, I don't want to just close Fat Moon. I would love to see it live on and find a grower to take over from me when that day comes.
Yeah, absolutely. So is this where you thought that you would be at this point, or did this kind of take a turn?
Never in my life did I think I'd be a mushroom grower. Never.
Yeah.
When you're asked as a kid what you're going to do when you grow up, I'm not sure I even thought I'd be a farmer, even though I grew up on a farm in the Midwest. I never quite saw myself being a farmer, but this is so different than the type of farm that I grew up on. And, I grew up on a big farm, cattle, acres of crops, row crops. And so, this is very different, but it's still about feeding people. Still the same spirit as many of my relatives who have large farms in the Midwest. We're all focused on feeding the world, and it's really fun actually to get together and chat with them. And, I'm farming in a few thousand square feet and they're farming on a few thousand acres. But we know that both types of farming are important to feeding the world. But no, I didn't expect to be here. I enjoy this. I found that for me, mushroom farming combines a lot of different interests for me. So mushroom farming requires both some expertise and appreciation of biology and engineering. So I'm constantly tweaking things to try and create the right grow environment for the mushrooms. Meanwhile, to do that, I have to be controlling fans and foggers, and so I'm calculating the electrical load and calculating the grains of water and how many gallons of water I need to make the right amount of fog for the day. And this fall is beautiful here in New England, but it means that one day the humidity outside's 45% and the next day it's 75%. And so that creates challenges for maintaining a consistent grow environment. So I enjoy those challenges. I like going to work and solving problems every day. I also am constantly learning, just as an entrepreneur, you have to manage every facet of the business. So some days I'm focused on bookkeeping and accounting, and other days it might be HR. Some days it's mushrooms. Many days it's sales. I really enjoy working with the chefs, and they're so creative and so passionate. And I have found I've developed a nice rapport with quite a few local chefs, and found that we really work well together. And they're always pushing me when I show up with my mushrooms. One of the most common questions is, what's new? What's new? What else do you have? What are you growing next? What are you trying? And so they're always pushing me to try new varieties of mushrooms, which helps keep things interesting for me.
Yeah, and with some of those challenges that you discussed with the humidity and just inconsistent, growing environments, I feel like it would be hard to kind of predict a yield for your product. Do you find that as a challenge as well? Or are you able to pretty much figure out as you go what your product yield will be?
If I can keep the growing conditions within the temperature and humidity level that make the mushrooms happy, then I'm able to predict the yields pretty well.
Okay.
It's when, we had a heat wave here last week and temperatures got up over 90, and I just don't have the big enough air conditioning equipment to keep it cooled down to 60 degrees when it's 90 degrees outside. So that's one of the challenges, and one of the things that I hope to fix, in the next year or so, to have the right scale of equipment to manage the heat and humidity and to keep all that consistent.
Okay. So 6 years ago, and it seems like you guys are doing really big things, that your growth has just been phenomenal in such a short amount of time. Talk about your growth a little bit, and then some of the challenges that you've overcame with the organization itself.
Sure. So I've grown the business somewhat slowly, always investing what I made back into the business. So I haven't taken any outside investment or big loans to get to where I am with the business. And it's interesting, COVID was actually really good for my business, which I sometimes feel a little badly even saying, because I know so many people have been suffering for the past year and a half. But what happened was people didn't want to go in the grocery store. And so they started turning to their local farm stands. And it was, the first few weeks were really tough because my business had been about 75 or 85% restaurants before COVID. So that weekend that things shut down here in the US, that weekend, all my chefs canceled their orders, and I already had mushrooms growing for them. But within a few days, the farm stands just couldn't keep up with demand. And it was March, so the local farms didn't have any fresh food to speak of. Some had a little bit in storage, but not enough to keep up with demand. And since I had already been selling to retail, I had the packaging and I knew how to do it. So I was able to quickly pivot and start selling all my mushrooms in retail. We did have to make some changes to our facility because we were not set up to be packing that much retail. That just takes a lot of time and a lot of materials to be packing things, in little 4-ounce packages instead of 5-pound boxes. But we were able to overcome those challenges. I have excellent relationships with my packaging suppliers. One of my panics, about a week after COVID, shut down the US, I panicked and bought about a 2-year supply of packaging because I didn't know how supply chains were going to get disrupted with plastic and, pint boxes and clamshells. So I did a panic buy and stocked up on enough packaging for a year or two. But I'm glad I did because other producers were scrambling to find the right packaging and to figure out how to put things in containers for individual consumers.
Yeah.
And then as part of that, just looking at how to make the business even more resilient, that's when we started selling grow kits online, and developing an online revenue, that's drop shipping. It's a whole separate part to our business, but it's still, related to the mushrooms. So we're still attracting, and now we're widening our audience, not just folks in the greater Boston area. We're really reaching out across the US and able to get our product further. Eventually, we may look into shipping fresh mushrooms as well, but that will require a whole, a new process, a new packaging. So for now, we're shipping the grow kits and developing that part of the business, as well as expanding our production of fresh mushrooms here in Massachusetts.
Cool. How did you come up with the name Fat Moon Mushroom Farm?
So when we started our farm 10 years ago, we were, brainstorming a name, and I knew I wanted something with moon because, the harvest moon and the full moon are so iconic in agriculture, and I love that imagery. But they're also, Harvest Moon Farm was kind of a bland name, and our son was very young at the time, and he looked up at the moon one night and called it the Fat Moon. And so we decided to go with it because, and it's worked well for our business. I feel like it makes people smile when they hear the name. And I've always thought we don't take ourselves too seriously here. We like putting a smile on people's faces. So we've just gone with it. It's really worked. It's been a nice.
It's very catchy.
Right, and people remember. People even be like the purple moon, the strawberry. Like they know it's something. And so it's one of those. I think it sticks with people. And then the other thing that I've done is invest in branding and marketing help. So my brain is more inclined to think about the biology and the mechanics of growing mushrooms, and not so much the design. And so that has been money well spent to hire some folks to help with the branding and the marketing and the logo, and to really feel confident in our look. That way, when I put a label on a package, I feel really good about how it looks. And really working with a few good marketing folks has helped give us a nice brand and nice look to the business.
Absolutely. I love your guys' brand. I think it's very wholesome. Checking out your website, everything flows so beautifully. It's really awesome. So we have some interactions here from the audience, comments and questions. So I'll read that for you, Elizabeth. It says, thanks, Elizabeth, for sharing your interesting story with us. As the year starts to get cooler, it seems like a perfect moment to get some lion's mane grain spawn, but it seems every supplier is back ordered. Will Fat Moon Farms be offering any lion's mane grain spawn soon enough? We're making poly-covered structures for protecting the sterilized substrate.
So we do not offer grain spawn. Grain spawn is typically for people that are a little further along in the process of growing their own mushrooms and inoculating straw or sawdust. We do sell grow kits that are inoculated blocks of sawdust, and they're ready to fruit. And spawn is just really happy, active mycelium. So you can actually take our grow kits and use that as spawn. It's mycelium on sawdust. Spawn is sometimes on grain, sometimes on sawdust. So if somebody was really desperate for some grain, for some spawn, they could use our lion's mane grow kit and use that as spawn.
Cool, thanks for answering. All right, I will have you go ahead and get into your presentation, and then we'll leave the last 10, 15 minutes for questions, or if you feel like going longer, that's fine. And then audience, I encourage you guys to put questions in as we go, and then I can ask Elizabeth before we wrap up.
Perfect, thanks, Sarah. And I just need to share my screen. I think that's Mark who gives me permission. All right, and can you see my screen? We're good?
Yep.
Enlarge that. So I have some details here about the business, some of the numbers for folks to see. Whoops, push that too soon. So we use about 2,500 square feet in a mill building, and that's worked pretty well. Although I have found that mill buildings get really hot, and so that's been a challenge. And so as part of that, one of the solutions to that challenge, I realized rather than fighting the heat in the month of August, I've started doing an August shutdown, which is pretty cool that as a farmer, I kind of get to take the opposite month off as most of my farmer friends. And so I can have a little downtime. We can head to the beach during the month of August. And then I find that folks are really eager to cook with mushrooms again in September. And once the temperatures start getting cooler and people are home and cooking more. So for the past 2 years, we've taken off August to deal with the heat, and it is actually working really well for our business. So we started growing the mushrooms in 2015, and this is a woman-owned farm, which here in Massachusetts, the county I live in, Middlesex County, is one of the few counties in all of the United States that's seeing an increase in the number of farms. And the demographic that's starting the most farms is women. So it's exciting to be part of that movement, and it's also exciting to be surrounded by other women who are farming. I have a lovely, support group and network here in Massachusetts of other farmers, and at least half of them are women farmers. Right now, we're producing up to 500 pounds a week in our peak seasons, and this fall we expect to exceed that as we're in the process of growing and expanding and producing more mushrooms. We are certified organic, and we're MGAP certified. That's a food safety certification that allows us to sell our mushrooms through distributors as well. So the varieties of mushrooms that we grow right now include shiitake, oyster, lion's mane, chestnut, and pioppino mushrooms. We may start growing more once our restaurant customers come back strongly. We'll probably begin experimenting with different varieties. And we grow mushrooms for restaurants, farm stands, CSAs, and boutique grocery stores. And so far we've done all of our own deliveries, but in the past few weeks, we've started a relationship with a distributor who is getting our mushrooms out to even more restaurants. And then we sell and ship the grow kits so that you can grow mushrooms at home. And what's exciting is the grow kits we sell are the same ones we use in our production, and they're an extra large grow kit that weighs about 10 pounds. So many of the grow kits you buy, at the big box stores are maybe 4 or 5 pounds. And you might get a pound of mushrooms. So our grow kits are much larger. They're designed to grow quickly because that's what that's a priority on our farm, is to grow mushrooms quickly. So you'll get results within a week or two on the grow kits from us. We also started offering grow your own classes and educational workshops. This was part of our pivot during COVID, just diversifying what we're offering and continuing to build our local following and to build relationships and to build customer loyalty. And there's really a lot of interest in mushrooms. People are really curious about this. I know a lot of folks garden, but it feels like mushrooms are the sort of the next frontier for gardeners who want to localize even more of their diet. We do sell mushroom compost for home gardeners. We've found that the mushroom compost has a high fungal level, which is different than high bacterial compost, and it's really desirable for organic farmers. I was really excited recently. A farmer friend took some of my compost and she examined it under a microscope and found an elevated number of nematodes, which is really exciting news because the nematodes help break down things in the soil then to make the nutrients available to the plants. So just because you put compost on the garden, it's not going to help unless you have things like nematodes to actually make the nutrients available to the plants. We do have a regular email list, which you can join on our website, and we send emails and Instagram and Facebook posts about mushrooms to hopefully build the excitement for mushrooms. So if you're in the US, you probably know that most of the mushrooms that are eaten in this country are the white button mushrooms. The Latin name is Bisporus agaricus, and that includes white buttons, portobellas, cremini, baby bellas, and that's 90% of the US mushroom consumption. And that information is from the mushroomcouncil.org. And there's a place in Pennsylvania called Kennett Square, Pennsylvania. You can see it marked on the map there. And there are 68 farms there that produce 63% of the white button mushrooms in the United States. And these Bisporus agaricus mushrooms are grown on compost in the dark, which is different than the mushrooms that I'm growing, which grow on cellulose in the light. So our mushrooms grow on sawdust. They can also grow on straw or cardboard, and they do require light. So it's a whole different thing than the big mushroom farms that you find in Pennsylvania. So I find it helpful to talk a little bit about the life cycle of mushrooms, and it helps us get a common language here. So if you look in this diagram on the top right side, that is inoculation. That's when two spores join together and start a new organism. So those spores germinate in the second step there on the right. And when the spores germinate, they begin to grow mycelium. Mycelium is the root of the mushroom. If you've ever pulled back a piece of tree bark and seen a white web on underneath the bark, that's my mushroom mycelium. It's actually fungus mycelium. Mushroom refers to the fruit body or the reproductive organ. So the mycelium grows and expands, and in the woods, it may grow for miles. It can grow deep, it can grow up trees, and you may never see this mycelium. But when the conditions are right, it'll form what's called a hyphal knot, or just a little nub. And that hyphal knot will grow into primordia. Primordia are these little, we also call them pins, little mushroom pins, little baby mushrooms that start emerging. And sometimes there's a step that includes fruit body selection. So you might, oyster mushrooms do this. They set hundreds, even thousands of pins, but perhaps only 10% of them will actually grow to maturity. So after fruit body selection, then the mushroom continues to grow and mature. And this is a sketch of oyster mushrooms. And once the mushroom reaches maturity, it will release its spores. And the spores then begin the process over once two of those connect and are inoculated. Mushrooms can exist just as mycelium for years and years and never fruit. And the conditions have to be just right for that fruiting to occur. For the mushrooms that we grow, the conditions have to be around 65 degrees. They like 90% humidity, and they also need a lot of fresh air. So you imagine those conditions here in the US and New England. You get a rainy day in the summer, and then it seems like the next day mushrooms are popping up all over your yard. It's because they had the right conditions. They had that wet weather for a day or two, and that was enough to allow them to start growing. So here's a quick picture of my grow rooms. So you can see I have racks with usually 4 layers of mushrooms going at any given time. The middle right, that's a rack of lion's mane mushrooms, and you can see these bags grow gorgeous 3-pound clusters of lion's mane mushrooms. On the bottom, we have shiitake. The shiitake are tolerant of higher CO2 levels, so we tend to keep those down at the bottom of the room. CO2 sinks and oxygen rises, so there's always air movement going on for that reason. And then in the middle on the left, we have some chestnut mushrooms. So at any given time, we might have a few hundred of these blocks in the grow room, all at various stages of fruiting. And here we have a picture from one of our recent mushroom hikes. So we lead hikes on Sunday mornings. We started doing that this year. Kind of started on a whim at the beginning of July because the weather was really wet here in New England and mushrooms were literally popping up everywhere. And I actually had a phone call one day from the local news station. They wanted me to be on the news to talk about why there were so many mushrooms in the yard and do we need to be afraid of them. And so after that, we decided to start hosting mushroom hikes in a forest nearby. And it's been a lot of fun. Every Sunday morning, we get together for about 2 hours. We've gathered a really nice group of folks who love mushrooms. And we go out in the woods every Sunday, and it changes. The local mushroom scene changes a lot in 1 week. So we're just looking for wild mushrooms. I do this partly because I like to hike in the woods, partly because I wanted to share my mushroom knowledge, and then also to work on strengthening my local community here, the gathering folks around that value mushrooms and bringing them into my business. And so just to give you an idea, these are some pictures of mushrooms we found on July 18th. So just a really gorgeous variety of mushrooms. Some of them I knew, some I brought home to identify, some I wasn't able to identify. But still, I enjoy the process of hunting for mushrooms. I'm not as attached to eating what we find, but really enjoying the hunt. The photo on the right is a little patch of chanterelles. We've been finding quite a few of those in the local forest. Just a lot of fun to be looking for them and finding them. So I mentioned that as part of our pivot during COVID, we started selling grow kits online so we can ship these to your home. And I wanted to talk a little bit about these because buying a grow kit is a really great way to have a firsthand experience of the life cycle of mushrooms. So the grow blocks they're 10 pounds. Imagine 2 loaves of bread stacked on top of the other, roughly that size. And they're made of wet sawdust, so you can imagine it's kind of heavy. So the first step when you take that shiitake grow block out of the bag, the first step is that the primordia begins to form little pins all over the block. And that can take anywhere from 1 to 3 days to begin. And then the mushrooms double in size every day, depending on the temperature and the humidity level. You can see the grow blocks then are completely covered with shiitake mushrooms. They're growing very quickly, and the oyster mushrooms grow in a similar fashion. And it kind of becomes a joke that you go to bed and then the next morning they're twice as big and you start getting a little worried about just how big this organism is going to grow. So after you've grown your mushrooms, then the next step would be to harvest the mushrooms. And then you have a choice. You can try for a second flush and see if you can get more mushrooms out of that block. You can compost the grow block. The earthworms love these grow blocks. I have a huge compost pile and so full of earthworms. Really happy. I think because as that mycelium breaks down, you get this wet, goopy stuff that the worms like to eat. And the blocks are also exothermic. So as they're decomposing the sawdust, they're giving off heat, which even in the winter, the earthworms are really active in my compost pile. You can also take your grow block, and as I mentioned earlier, the grow block is mycelium. So you can take that mycelium and expand it onto new substrate. So you could expand it onto cardboard, onto sawdust, any type of cellulose, and continue growing more mycelium, which will then eventually give you more mushrooms. Here are some pictures of the grow blocks, just so you can see what it might look like. The shiitake block fits in a 13 by 9 pan on your kitchen counter. So you can put it in the pan, and then here we have a plastic shopping bag on top of the grow block to help keep the humidity in. There's also a spray bottle here because the blocks do need to be sprayed at least a few times a day. If you're doing this with kids, it can be a lot of fun. They can't overwater it, so you let them go to town spraying it for fun. Most kids love playing with the spray bottle. So in the first couple days, between 1 and 3 days, pins start to emerge. So you get the primordia, and you can see we have an orange circle there, and where the primordia is starting to pop out of the grow block. And then the photograph, these 2 pictures are between 4 and 6 days. So I think that picture on the left, if you've ever eaten that sweet potato casserole with marshmallows on top, I think it looks a little like that, like baby marshmallows have been toasted in the oven. And then on the right, we have a picture here when the mushrooms are maybe 5 or 6 days old. They're still growing and expanding. And then you have success when these caps are bigger and more fully open. And I consider the photo on the left a success as well when you get a 2 or 3 year old engaged with growing their own food. I always think that's a success. So here you can see that the shiitakes after 7 to 10 days are starting to open up on the bottom. You can see the caps are pulling away from the stem, and that means they'll begin dropping their spores and they've reached their maximum maturity, and it's time to harvest them. And then I have a series of photos of the oyster mushrooms. So you can see here, days 1 through 3, the pins are just starting to form on the oyster block and start emerging out where you cut the bag. You might be able to see where I have my mouse here. Even under the plastic, there are more pins forming, but this is where we'll have the primordia selection. And only these at the opening will be allowed to continue and mature. The block will abort the rest and they won't mature. So in just 4 days or so, you start getting these mushrooms. These are a couple inches tall. The oysters, when you grow them in cool temperatures, they have a gorgeous deep blue color. They start off really dark when they're young, and then as they get larger, they expand and get lighter. So you can see the one on the left expanded quite a bit and is light. The one on the right, I had grown it in my kitchen sink so I could give it a good drink of water a few times a day, and with really it was probably excessive water. That grow block turned out to turn quite dark. So the growing conditions really affect how the mushrooms, the final appearance of the mushrooms in terms of the color. So here we have a mature block that we had posted on one of our social media accounts of, beautiful blue oysters. So one of the things that I love to talk about is to pique your interest in eating your Amazon boxes. So if you take a little tiny bit of mushroom mycelium and put it on some wet cardboard, the mycelium will start to consume the cardboard. So you can see the white fuzzy stuff on the cardboard, that's oyster mushroom mycelium. And one year I took a whole pile of boxes, I shredded the cardboard, I soaked it in water so it was wet, and then I sprinkled just a little bit of oyster mushroom mycelium between layers of cardboard and filled an 18-gallon plastic tote. And about 3 weeks later, I was getting these mushrooms sprouting up on the inside of the tote along the side. I find it exciting to think about how something that's a waste product, like cardboard boxes, could potentially be turned back into food. Now, of course, we'd be cautious about actually doing that because of concerns about glue and what other chemicals might have been used to create the cardboard. But it could be a way to deal with cardboard waste. Even if we're not going to eat this cardboard, just to decompose the cardboard and then use it in our gardens would be an exciting use. And there's also research, some really innovative companies looking at how to use mycelium, mushroom mycelium, to make packaging. So perhaps old cardboard could be recycled into other packaging, molded instead of molded polystyrene packaging. There are companies trying to grow mycelium into certain shapes and then bake it to harden it and kill it, and then use that instead of polystyrene. So I find it exciting to understand how mushrooms grow, how they consume cellulose, and then to start brainstorming about the different applications for that. So I love this photo. I took some mushroom blocks that had already fruited once and I tossed them outside in an area with some ferns, and you can see some moss. It was on the north side of my house so it wouldn't dry out. I know some people are a little grossed out by the idea of intentionally growing fungus in their house. So I wanted to do this as an experiment. The mushrooms were so happy living among the ferns. They had plenty of fresh air. They were probably getting extra oxygen from being so close to the plants, and then getting all that natural humidity there from the ground. We grew enormous oyster mushrooms this way. So if you get a little bit of, if you buy one oyster grow kit, you can use that mycelium to keep growing. You can inoculate cardboard, you can inoculate straw, you can inoculate more sawdust. You could, I've taken a bale of straw and used it. There are ways you can plant tomatoes into a bale of straw. Done that and inoculated it with mushrooms, and then I had mushrooms growing underneath my tomato plants. So a lot of exciting ways to experiment with mushrooms once you understand the basics of growing them at home. And then here I have the photograph of the mushroom compost on the left, and on the right is a photo of my cherry tomatoes. So you might, if you look closely, you'll see that, oops. I'm not sure if hold on, one thing here. So typically cherry tomatoes grow in clusters, maybe of 10 to 15. But if you look closely, instead of clusters of 10 to 15, I would get 3 clusters where instead of just one. So I was getting maybe 40 or 50 cherry tomatoes on each cluster. So really prolific tomatoes when I fertilize with mushroom compost. I apply it directly in the spring, put it into the soil. I also use it weekly to make a mushroom compost tea, where I put it in a bucket with a bubbler and some molasses and let it bubble overnight to increase the beneficial bacteria. And I apply that directly to all my plants. So if you do get a mushroom grow kit, I would urge you to be sure to put it in your compost when you're done and use it to feed your garden. So I just had a few notes here that we do, classes, and you can certainly visit us online with to purchase grow kits and follow us on Instagram and Facebook and be part of our mushroom community. Even if you're not here in New England, you're welcome to join us and chat with us online and hopefully spread the love for mushrooms. All right, so that's everything I had prepared, Sierra.
Great presentation. Thank you.
Sure.
I am shocked about how fast your mushroom kits fruit. That's just mind blowing.
Yes, yes. Really quick, which is really gratifying. You don't have to wait long. It's not like tomatoes or something that take months to grow. You can get results in a week, and you can just, after 1 week, you can just stop there, or you can keep going with more experiments if you're really curious about it.
And is that with every kit that you have, or each different type of mushroom takes a different time frame?
So the oyster mushrooms and actually the oyster, shiitake, and pioppino all grow in about a week. The lion's mane might take closer to 2 weeks, depending on the conditions.
Okay.
And
What is your favorite?
Oh, go ahead.
What is your favorite mushroom to grow?
I like growing the oysters. In that photograph on the screen right now, there's some yellow oysters. The oysters grow so fast. I mean, overnight they double in size, so they're really amazing. I never tire of looking at them. And the yellow ones are so beautiful. We also sometimes grow pink oysters, which is, the colors are just stunning. And if we grow the mushrooms with enough light and cool enough temperatures, they have an iridescent blue color to them, which is just amazing to naturally, to find that color, growing naturally. It looks like something that you would have had to manufacture to get that coloring. So the oysters are the most, visually the most stunning and fun to grow. However, to eat, I really prefer the shiitake mushrooms. Just think of everything we grow, they have the most intense mushroom flavor. And they seem to go in everything. Whatever I'm cooking, I can manage to sneak in a handful of shiitake mushrooms if I want.
Yeah, what is your favorite dish with them?
So I just recently learned a new way to prepare mushrooms. A new customer passed on that he cooks mushrooms by putting them in a pan, adding some water, which I always sauteed them first and then added liquid. But he puts them in the pan with liquid and oil right away, simmers them until the water cooks off, and then you have the oil already in the pan. And so then he lets them kind of brown and start browning after the water cooks off. And it's turned out really well. So I'm pretty sure we have that recipe on our if we stop right there on the screen, the top left picture there, the mushroom toast. So the easy oyster mushroom recipe, that's a new one that we just added to our food blog. Has been my favorite way to cook them lately. I also like to cook them on the grill because then you can get you get the nice smoky flavor as well as all the umami of the mushrooms.
Yeah, audience, wow, you guys should really take advantage of the resource here with all of these recipes. I know I'm going to. Well, I should be more honest. My husband is the cook of the house, so I'm going to point him to this recipe.
Nice.
Yeah, so let's just do some fun questions. What are some of the best resources that you've had along your route of learning how to grow all of these?
Sure. So there's the mushroom guru for the whole U.S. is Paul Stamets, and anybody who has any experience with mushrooms quickly learns about Paul Stamets. He made the movie that's popular on Netflix right now called Fantastic Fungi, which is really a great movie. Introduces you to a lot of concepts about mushrooms. Fantastic photography, time-lapse videography. Really a beautiful movie to watch if you're curious about mushrooms. So anything by Paul Stamets is worth watching or listening. He also did a TED Talk. So I think that was one of his first things, before he did the movie. And then I had help from a guy who named Willie Crosby, another mushroom farmer who's really generous with his time. And he helped me past some of the early challenges and helped me realize I really could make a business of this. I would also say, people always laugh when I say this, but you can learn a whole lot on Google and YouTube when you ask the right questions. And for a while, there were a few mushroom farmers who had competing YouTube channels. I think they were monetizing, their YouTube content. Good for them. And they were creating really engaging, informative YouTube show videos. And I would watch them both for the content in the video and to look over their shoulder to see how they were doing things and to see what kind of equipment they were using and to see how they had their grow room set up. So really spending time, just absorbing everything I could learn online was a big help as well.
It sounds like you're really knowledgeable in your soil science. Is that something that you self-taught yourself as well, or did you take courses to learn about that?
Oh, that's totally self-taught. I haven't taken anything with soil science, but I really, I'm curious, and I think if you're willing to learn, I think that's probably been one of the biggest lessons about being an entrepreneur, is you never know it all. And you're always on a journey, and you're always willing to look anywhere for the answers. So because I set up this grow room and a couple grow rooms down, I'm trying to control the climate. There's not necessarily an off-the-shelf solution for small-scale mushroom farming. So I'm always looking at other industries to see what kind of equipment and technology I can borrow. Lucky for us, marijuana has been legalized in Massachusetts, and I know in a number of states as well. So the equipment used to grow marijuana is very similar to the equipment needed to grow mushrooms in terms of fans and foggers and sensors to maintain the right environment. So our conditions are slightly different, but we need some of the same equipment. And so, for example, my grow lights are pretty inexpensive grow lights from Home Depot, and they've been running for 3.5 years. And they're designed for a marijuana operation with, completely sealed against dust and spores and humidity, and they've worked great. So I feel like as mushroom farmers, we have benefited from some of the innovation in that industry, and it's really helped us out.
I'm actually glad that you gravitated towards that way, because I was going to ask you about some of your tools, the technology that you were using to do all this. So what are a few things? I know you mentioned your lamps and your foggers and fans. So what are like a few must-haves, and then a few things that you've tried that ended up just being a flop that you wouldn't recommend?
So with the fans, I can't urge people strongly enough that if you're going to do this and you're dealing with humidity, to get the right fans. So there's a brand called Hurricane fans that are designed for high humidity. So if you use a regular box fan when you're growing mushrooms, the motor is not protected from the spores and the humidity. And so unfortunately, I've heard of a few mushroom farms that have had equipment catch on fire because it wasn't the right equipment for growing mushrooms and for being in an environment with so much humidity. So that would be my biggest piece of advice, is look for fans that are designed for high humidity. I have offered consulting in the past for folks who want to grow mushrooms. And as an entrepreneur, it's not uncommon I don't know if this is unique just to mushrooms or if other industries have this. People will call mushroom farmers and say, I want to be a mushroom farmer and sell to restaurants. Can I come over and see how you do it? And they expect us to share all our secrets.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Not so much secrets, but what we've learned. So I have established a rate for consulting, and I'll tell folks, I have a very high hourly rate, to consult if you are thinking about setting up a mushroom farm. But I can tell you that I will show you $10,000 of bad equipment purchases. So even if I'm, charging you a few $100s, either you may decide not to be a mushroom farmer, which that would save you a lot of money probably, but you may, I'll at least show you and tell you why different types of, I have 4 different foggers. The most expensive one was about $1,500. And I don't even use that one. I'm running with one that costs $500, but I can explain why, the different foggers at different price points did or didn't work for me,
Mm-hmm.
which is huge. I mean, I've spent thousands and thousands of dollars on foggers. Killed some, because I didn't handle them right, so they died, and then I'd have to replace them, and then bought things that were too expensive for my setup, that just sit collecting dust now. So certainly a lot of information. I think if anyone's considering growing mushrooms, if you contact someone who's currently growing and they, ask for money for, they offer consulting for an hourly fee, my advice would be to take it, because you will learn more. If you go in with an open mind and a list of questions, you can save yourself thousands of dollars of mistakes by talking to someone first.
Very forward thinking. I like that idea. So some more interactions here from the audience. Thank you guys. We have one that says, you mentioned optimal temperature for growing. Being in the South with high temperature, would you suggest waiting until temperature drops, or is having them inside where it's about 78 degrees cool enough?
I would wait until the temperature drops. I find that over 75 degrees, we start to see the mushrooms really struggle. Either they don't start pinning in the beginning, or they do pin, but then you get a really misshapen mushroom if you're growing it at 80 or 85 degrees.
Okay, thanks for answering. Seeing if we have anything else from you guys. We got about 10 minutes left, so get in your questions while we still have Elizabeth here. And a question that I have is, how do you balance life and work?
Well, it was really helpful for me to move my business from my house to a mill building, because then I couldn't be tempted to work a little more, at 10 o'clock at night or something. And part of why I'm doing this is because it does give me flexibility in my life. So as an entrepreneur, sometimes you can take the day off if you arrange things. You can take more time off than if you had a regular job. But other times, then you find yourself working, on a Christmas morning or something because nobody else wants to work. So there's some trade-offs there. But it's helped me to move the business away from where I live and to have a little bit of separation there. I think it also helps to know what your goals are for the business. And I've become more clear that I want a business that's worth selling someday. So that helps motivate me and keep me focused on what's important in the business, which is being really efficient at what I do versus, you can start a business, something like mushrooms. There are a million things I can experiment with, and I would love to. But I know to have a profitable business, I have to stay very focused on the core parts of my business and not let myself get too distracted, by other possibilities. And then my goal is to have the core part running and really profitable, and then that will free me up for more experimentation, opportunities, what I mentioned before, the packaging, ideas of microremediation, value-added products with the mushrooms. Some farmers use their surplus to make things like mushroom jerky or mushroom pickles. I would love to develop a really high-value compost. So I currently compost, and I know it's good stuff, but I need to be able to quantify that. So that's another project I'm working on with a little farm or a local farm, is to be able to quantify, exactly how our mushroom compost is better, not just in nutrients, but in fungal and bacterial life that's present in the compost.
So do you think that you will take a new business venture maybe and start selling your compost?
Oh, absolutely. So I sell some of it, but that's one of my goals, is to be able to sell the compost as a really high value compost. That way I recover, I'm making money then on my waste is really my goal with the compost, and not just to make a little money, but to, put more effort into it to be able to have a really high value crop that's desirable for local organic farmers.
Yeah, and such a positive impact for the planet overall as well.
Right, and I love that my waste can become something, also beneficial to other local farms. So then I'm not only supplying them with mushrooms to help their bottom line as another product at their farm stand, but that I can have my waste cycle into their production is really exciting as well.
That is. Another question here from the audience. Elizabeth, is Fat Moon experimenting with drying mushroom and making powder from them for adding to smoothies, morning coffee, etc.? Thanks.
We are not. So we to do that we have to have a certified kitchen, and we don't have a certified kitchen. So that's really the limitation for us for drying mushrooms. And the space we're in right now is not conducive to a kitchen that we could get approved. So we're waiting until we may need a whole different space or a different location just for drying the mushrooms. But that's also an area where I know other producers who end up spending a lot of money setting up the kitchen. And so it's been on my mind that maybe I don't have to be the one to do that myself, but to partner with some local kitchens. So we have had some conversations in the past with, local community kitchens. We just haven't found the right relationship and the right schedule, because I'm not growing just to have a value-added product. It's my surplus that I'm wishing to process. So we haven't quite figured out the right arrangement for doing that. Right now, if I have surplus, I mostly just hustle and sell it off fresh. So I haven't had things go to waste yet.
Yeah, sounds like partnering up would be probably a better fit for you then.
Right, and setting up a kitchen, because then it does get to, how many different enterprises can you have going on, and you really have to treat that value added as a whole separate enterprise. So making the decision of whether that's, where I want to put my energy, or, let someone else work on the value added part of that in their kitchen. That way I can be more focused on things like compost, other parts of the business.
So getting back to your growth and where you are going, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And you were talking about some of the challenges with growing in the mill building. So when you do expand, do you plan on still growing there, or do you have new ideas in the making for a new place to do all your growing?
I've been looking for a new place, but we live outside of Boston, where real estate is crazy expensive.
Yeah.
So I really feel like it's going to take a really creative solution. So I talk to as many people as I can. I think one of the things that's made me successful is that I talk to everybody I can. And so anytime I get the chance to mention to somebody that I'm looking for space, I do, because I don't know, if they might know somebody that might be the right place. It's also hard to find a place for mushrooms, because people have really crazy ideas about mushrooms. And so when I call, just to answer ads for commercial space available, I usually get a lot of crazy, I hear all sorts of things that people just don't understand. My grow room, my goal is for it to look more like a lab, a clean lab, completely sterile. But people assume that I'm growing on compost in the dark. And I've had people say, we don't want rodents. So no, we don't, all sorts of ideas about what mushrooms might bring to their space. So we keep looking, hoping to find just the right place, and then we'll make a move.
Okay. Let's see. Mark, we have about 2 minutes left, and do you want to ask any questions or comments while I check and see if there's anything else from the audience before we wrap up with Elizabeth for tonight?
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it was amazing having you on. I appreciate it so much. I'm so glad that we could connect through Instagram.
Yes, that was perfect.
Yeah, so I'll just let you say any closing remarks or thoughts. And Mark, why don't you pull up maybe her contact information so everybody can jot down how they can get a hold of her and where to reach her. And then you can just kind of give your final thoughts, and then we'll close it out.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. Thanks to your team that helped put this together today. And I know you guys have a tremendous amount of information on your website. And I'm so in awe of what you are doing and how you're supporting local farms. I think that's what I appreciate the most, is that you're reaching out to entrepreneurs and really elevating local entrepreneurs and giving us a platform to share what we're doing. So if folks would like to check out what we're doing, fatmoonmushrooms.com is the website. You can reach us on Instagram, on Facebook, send us an email, any of those ways, get in touch. There's so much excitement around mushrooms right now. It's a really exciting field to be in, and I feel fortunate to be able to make a living at this and also have tremendous possibilities ahead in terms of new applications for mushrooms in our lives that we're not even quite aware of yet, all the ways that we can use mushrooms. Paul Stamets says that mushrooms will save the world. And so it's fun to be part of that and to be connected with the local food movement as well, while growing mushrooms. So thank you, Sierra. Thanks to everyone who tuned in today, and I appreciate it.
It was a pleasure having you, Elizabeth. Have a great evening.
Thank you. You too.